Hello, boys and girls. We are on 5-6 from our textbook, which is rational number equations. And our learning target today is I can solve one-step equations that include fractions and decimals. Okay, some things to think about as we go through this lesson. Think about how do we divide fractions. So think back a few units. How did we divide fractions, and how would that information help us solve this type of question where 3/4 times g equals 6. Okay. Vocab here that we need to know. Inverse property of multiplication. Okay, this means the product of a number and its multiplicative inverse is 1. Now remember, multiplicative inverse is where we take and we flip the fraction. So we switch the numerator and the denominator. So an example of this, 3/4, if we multiply that by its multiplicative inverse, so it's flipped form, so 3/4 times 4/3, well, 3 times 4 is 12, and 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 over 12 is equal to 1. So taking a fraction, multiplying it by its multiplicative inverse will give us an answer of 1. And this is just showing you with letter form what that looks like. Okay, so here we are looking at finding the multiplicative inverse of these numbers. So find the multiplicative inverse of 2/5. So we take and we flip that fraction, the numerator and the denominator switch. So the numerator moves to the denominator and vice versa. So 2/5, its multiplicative inverse would be 5/2. And we want to leave it like that as an improper fraction. Next one, the multiplicative inverse of 2 1/3. Now, it's a mixed number, so what we have to do is we have to turn this into an improper fraction. Now, in order to do that, we take the denominator, multiply it by the whole number, so 3 times 2 is 6, plus the numerator of 1 is 7, 7/3. So the multiplicative inverse, take and flip that, would be 3/7. Okay. Couple here for you to try on your own and then come back and check. The multiplicative inverse of 5/6, we've taken flipped that, would be 6/5. 1 1/2, again we have to change this to an improper fraction. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3, so 3/2. So now the multiplicative inverse, that flipped, would be 2/3. The multiplicative inverse of 8, we have to turn that into, we need a numerator and a denominator. Any whole number we put over 1, so 8 over 1. And then the multiplicative inverse of that would be 1/8. Last one, 4/3, multiplicative inverse would be 3/4. All right, division equations involving rational numbers. Vocab here for you, multiplication property of equality. It says that if you multiply each side of an equation by the same non-zero number, the two sides remain equal. So just like with adding, subtracting, things like that, 5 equals 5, if we multiply both sides by 2, they are still equal to each other. And now in algebra, we have x over 2 equals -3. So if we multiply both sides by 2, x equals -6, they're going to be equal to each other. And then 2/3 times x equals 4, multiply it by, we multiplied it by each side by the multiplicative inverse, and we got x equals 6. Something to note here, the fraction bar indicates division. So where we had that x over 2, that's telling us that we are taking x and we are dividing it by 2. So on here, 7 equals n over 4. So we are solving for n. In order to do that, we have to isolate the variable just like we did for the other ways of solving for missing variables. Get the variable by itself. So we do the inverse operation. We are doing n divided by 4, so the inverse of division is multiplication, so we multiply by 4. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. So those 4's cancel. 7 times 4 is 28. So n equals 28. And now, if we go back and check, plug this back in, 28 divided by 4 equals 7. So our answer does work. Okay, let's do another one here. D divided by 3½ equals 4 2/10. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this equation so I have a little bit more room. All right, we are taking our variable and dividing it by 3½ so now we need to do the inverse of that, which is multiplication. So we're going to multiply each side by 3½. Okay. These cancel. Let's do some long multiplication here. Remember, for multiplying decimals, we don't have to line up the decimal, but this time it does. 5 times 2 is 10, carry our 1. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21. We're moving over a spot, so we add a 0. 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 4 is 12. Add these together. We had 1 decimal spot, 2 decimal spots, so we move our decimal over 2. Oops. So our variable equals 14 7/10. Okay, there's 3 for you to try and then come back and check. First one, 6 equals m divided by 8. Multiply each side by 8, since that's what we're dividing our variable by. 8 times 6 equals 48. And then you could go back and plug this in. 48 divided by 8 equals 6, so that does work. Next one, p divided by 2.8 equals 1 5/10. Do the inverse of multiplication, inverse of division, which is multiplication. So we multiply each side by 2 8/10. Okay, do your long multiplication like we did, and you get 4 2/10. Okay. Last one, k divided by 4 7/10 equals 2 3/10. Inverse of division is multiplication, so multiply each side by 4 7/10. These ones cancel. Okay, we can show our long multiplication again for this one. 7 times 3 is 21, 14, 15, 16, add a 0, 12, 8 plus 1 is 9, add these together, 1 decimal spot, 2 decimal spots. So our answer is 10 81/100. All right, now we're looking at multiplication equations when we have fractions in front of our variable, or fractions as coefficients. That's the number in front of our variable. Okay, here's something to note. The expression 3/4 x can be read as 3/4 of x, 3/4 multiplied by x, 3x divided by 4, or x over 4 multiplied by 3. So there's just a lot of ways that we can read that. What we're going to do, now we're doing multiplication. Opposite of multiplication is to do division. So we would divide each of these sides by 3/4. And when we do division, we flip that second fraction and we actually multiply. So really what you're doing is, let me kind of move this so I have more room. You are taking this 3/4 x equals 12 over 20. And if you think about it, this 3/4 divided by 3/4 is the same as multiplying by 4 over 3. So you're multiplying by the multiplicative inverse. So on here, we are going to multiply each side, flip that fraction, and multiply each side by the multiplicative inverse. So the 4's cancel, 3's cancel. We're just left with x. Now I can look for shortcuts between my diagonals. 3 goes into 3 one time, and it goes into 12 4 times. And 4 can be divided by 2 actually, sorry, you can divide 4 by 4, which is 1. 20 divided by 4 is 5. So 4 times 1 is 4. 5 times 1 is 5. So our answer is 4/5. So just multiply each side by the multiplicative inverse, that fraction flipped. Okay. I'll zoom up. There are 3 for you to try on your own, and then come back and check your answer once you're done. First one, 1/2 x equals 8. So 1/2 times some number gives us 8. So I'm going to multiply by 2/1. Okay, I'm just flipping that fraction. The 1/2, I'm multiplying by the multiplicative inverse. Again, these cancel. So I'm left with x. 8 times 2 is 16. And 1 times 1 is 1, so our answer is 16. And if we plug that back in, 1/2 of 16, taking half of 16 would get me 8, so that does work. 3/4 x equals 9. We are multiplying by 3/4. So we're multiplying x by 3/4. So in order to get the coefficient by its, to get the variable by itself, we are going to multiply each side by the multiplicative inverse, that fraction flipped. Again, those all cancel, so we're left with x. For whole numbers, we can put over 1. Let's look for our shortcuts. 3 and 9 can both be divided by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. 3 times 4 is 12. 1 times 1 is just 1, so our answer is 1. And if you hadn't done your shortcuts, you would have done 9 times 4, which is 36, over 1 times 3, which is 3. That simplifies down to 12. Okay. And last one here. 7/8 x equals 21/64. Multiply each side by the multiplicative inverse of the fraction in front of your variable. These all cancel, so you're left with x. This is where shortcuts come in handy. You could do 21 times 8 and then 64 times 7 and then simplify your answer at the end. Or you can say, hey, I can divide both 8 and 64 by 8. 8 divided by 8 is 1. 64 divided by 8 is 8. And 7 and 21, I can divide both of those by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 21 divided by 7 is 3. Now 3 times 1 is 3. 8 times 1 is 8. So our final answer is 3/8. All right, you can go back and rewatch any part of this video. Otherwise, look at the examples in your textbook or look at the tutor videos online. Otherwise, head on over and take your 5-6 NICU at this time.